says I'm live. I'm gonna wait for the LinkedIn one to actually kick in before I say anything. It should be usually LinkedIn lags about 5 to 10 seconds behind when the stream actually comes up. All right, cool. The stream is up. And let me mute it. There we go. All right, cool. Well, welcome everybody who is watching to this month's HashiStack live stream. I'm Ned Bellavance, and I am very excited to be joined once again by my good friend Brian Krausen. Hi, Brian. How you doing?
Good. How are you, Ned?
I'm doing well. For folks who might not know you, which seems ridiculous, can you just do a little bit about yourself and what HashiCorp products you're most familiar with?
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, Brian Krausen, consultant, work for Riverpoint Technology, and I generally focus on helping customers implement HashiCorp products like in their enterprise. Right, I've been working with HashiCorp products, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years now, so it's been quite a while. I mainly focus on, I'd say, Vault, but I do have a lot of skill sets, with like Terraform, Nomad, Consul, doing a Consul project now for customer. Haven't really messed with Waypoint and Boundary too much, but those are kind of on my to-do list right now. So,
all right, cool. All right, and I'd also like to introduce 2 new HashiCorp ambassadors. Well, not new to the program, but new to this live stream. Let's start with Mark LeBlanc. Welcome to the live stream. Why don't you tell the good folks a little bit about yourself?
Thanks, Ned. Mark LeBlanc. Yeah, I am a DevOps consultant at a company called Arctic, based out of Toronto, Canada. We, similar to kind of Brian, but up here in Canada, we're helping customers adopt all things HashiCorp and tackling a lot of cloud adoption, digital transformation type projects at scale and just in their enterprise. My personal HashiCorp products that I'm big with, I have a soft spot for Consul because I think service mesh is super cool. But obviously, there was a lot of work with Terraform and Vault as well.
All right, awesome. And we might come back around to that whole service mesh discussion because I'm curious to pick your brain on that a little bit. Our last guest today is Marko Bevic. I don't know if I've ever said your last name, so hopefully I got close.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, it's really hard to pronounce specifically for the English-speaking people. So it's actually Bouts. So it's probably completely different how you would pronounce it.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you for having me, Nat. I'm really glad to be here with my fellow HashiCorp ambassadors as well. So my name is Marko. I'm the head of consultancy at a company called The Scale Factory. We're based in London, UK. So it seems like the only one from the European side tonight. And yeah, what we do, we kind of are kind of AWS SaaS business consultancy. So we mainly help our customers to kind of run their workloads in AWS. But obviously, I shouldn't be using obviously, right, Nat? So as we help customers do that, we do a lot of HashiStack along the way. So my personal preference would be for Terraform, obviously. So that's a tool that I've kind of started with. I used it in the past quite a lot. And kind of adjacent to that would be Terraform Cloud as well. But historically, I've been using Packer and Vagrant quite a lot, specifically pre-whole Kubernetes and container as the containerization era. So yeah. And yeah, I've dipped into the Waypoint as well a bit, so have some experience with that.
All right, that's. I mean, you've got almost the whole stack there. Honestly, I'm trying to think of something that you left out. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what it would be. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody who just joined the live stream. We are open to whatever questions you have, comments regarding anything in the HashiCorp portfolio. You've got people here who know Consul, Vault, Terraform, maybe even Waypoint. I want to lean on Marko for that one. So feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I will definitely pop those questions up to our ambassadors as we go. Now, one interesting thing that happened, I guess it was last week. I don't know. It's hard to tell. The weeks go by so quickly, but Hashi Days happened over in the EU, and there were a number of interesting and cool announcements. One of them was Terraform 1.5. Would anybody like to comment on some of the new features in Terraform 1.5? I'll elect somebody. Brian.
Me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm probably the worst person to elect because I've been on holiday for the last 2 weeks, so I'm still playing catch up with everything.
Well, then this is our opportunity to let you know what the cool new stuff is.
Yeah,
so
let me know about it, Ned. Let's hear it.
One thing that I was very excited about was the official edition of import blocks into Terraform, and this is something that's been a long time coming. For those who haven't been following the world of importing existing infrastructure into Terraform, if you wanted to use native Terraform, it was pretty painful, if we're being honest. So you had to run import statements one at a time for every single resource that you wanted to import, and then you had to write all the configuration blocks yourself, and then hopefully everything lined up and nobody else did anything with state while you were working with your import tools, because it didn't hold a lock on state while you're doing the whole process. And now they've changed that a little bit with import blocks. So Mark and Marco, have either of you started using import blocks at all with your practice?
No, I just had to pull my notes up about what I captured about the Terraform. So this is tied back to the generate config.
Yeah.
Right?
So that's in addition to the new syntax. So instead of running an imperative import command from the CLI, now you can add import blocks into your config that have a to, like what resource address do you want this thing to be assigned, and the ID, whatever the unique identifier is on the cloud side or whatever resource provider you're using. And if you want Terraform to try, you can run a Terraform plan after you've added those import blocks with a flag that's generate config out and give it a file path, and it will try to generate a configuration for all of the resources in the blocks based off of what's in the provider, and it'll put all of those configurations in the file. It's an experimental feature.
So when I jotted my notes, I'm just checking our internal Slack, and my thoughts around that. I think that's probably the biggest announcement for Terraform that I picked up on. Definitely a pain point trying to figure out what was built. Okay, I got to reverse engineer what someone was thinking into Terraform code. And to me, this is the same take on trying to get something like ChatGPT or any of those sort of AI engines to generate your Terraform. Yeah, maybe it's not perfect, but if it gets you 60 to 70% of the way there, that's still pretty cool.
Yeah.
I think that's my current expectation on a first iteration of something like this generate config.
Yeah,
so it didn't take us long to mention ChatGPT, right?
How can you not? I think everybody's talking about it in every conference right now about just generative AI and how it's going to impact.
Yeah,
for sure.
Does seem pretty unavoidable. A little more background about the import blocks, just because I've been playing around with it. So even if you generate the config yourself, you don't need to use that additional flag, but it will still show you in the plan what it's going to import, which I think is really nice, because now you can import multiple resources at the same time. You get an execution plan instead of directly editing state, and then you can run the apply and import the resources. So I like the workflow. It's a little more in line with the rest of the workflows they're pushing around doing everything declaratively. Getting back to the AI thing, Brian, you and I have talked about using generative AI a little bit for writing code and whatnot, but I'm curious to hear Mark and Marco's experience in what they've been doing with AI tools. So Marco, why don't you go first? Are you using any of the like ChatGPT or Copilot stuff that's out there to help you with your day-to-day tasks?
I'm going to go ahead and say not that much. It's probably going to be a controversial kind of opinion here, but I think it definitely has its own place in terms of code generation and kind of. I think there are specific use cases where ChatGPT is really good. Whereas I would say maybe knowledge generation is not one of them, but I think summarizing and working on an existing kind of, blobs of text and kind of things, I think that's a really good use case. And for example, if you're looking for, Terraform code or something to improve on, that might be a really nice use case. But maybe not generating a new kind of thing out of thin air or based on your kind of wishes. If I can just kind of circle back to the import feature, I just wanted to add something that you kind of mentioned before, Nat, if I can. So you mentioned that you quite like the workflow, and I think you hit the nail on the head here, where I think it was currently missing with the import workflow is you had to use tools like Terraform or something like that so far if you wanted to import resources automatically or generate the config at least. Whereas now I think having the workflow, part of the regular workflow that Terraform kind of has, that's important, as well as generating the code, where I think in the past you had to manually write that, and that was a really tedious task, right? And quite manual, so that's good.
Yeah. And I'm excited to see that the generate config feature right now, it literally just pulls all of the attributes that exist for that object in whatever the provider is and creates a resource block with every single argument filled out. That's like their first stab at it. But I think it's going to condense things down to only maybe produce the ones that actually have values assigned to them at some point. That's probably going to be like in 1.5.1 or something like that.
Exactly. And I think I cannot wait until this becomes part of the Terraform cloud workflow as well. I think this is the part that's still kind of missing out on, because I think where we probably want to see that kind of working as is having a Terraform cloud workflow that generates the code and commits it back to your repo, where I don't think that's currently supported workflow.
Right. Yeah. If you're trying to do it with like the VCS workflow in Terraform Cloud or something, like, yeah, that's not currently supported to write back things. They're looking into it, but I think one of the challenges that I heard is they support more than just GitHub, so they got to figure out that workflow for each VCS that they're supporting. So a little tough. To circle back to the AI question, Mark, you didn't get a chance to chime in. Are you using AI day to day, or is it still just a fun experiment you're trying out?
I use it by the hour, not necessarily for custom work. As a technologist, I dabble in things all the time and try to find the edges of things. I've had mixed success with ChatGPT getting it to write code. It's fun. It gets lost, and specifically with Terraform, sometimes you'd get. I tried to have it help me build a Consul demo a couple months back, and you would get very dated configs that just like it's 3 versions ago, outdated, doesn't work, irrelevant. I think I was trying to get it to do something with Vault at one point. It was trying to get me to set up the Consul backend, which, as we know, is 2 or 3 years out anyways. That was kind of the standard approach. It's really interesting. It's a lot of fun. I don't know where it's going. I have members of my team that are playing with GitHub Copilot. And, I was at their Red Hat Summit event, and they were talking about an Ansible version. I don't know where that's all going to lead us. I think that these very specific ones are going to be very, I don't know, just wait and see, I think. Give it another 6 months.
Yeah. It is going to be really interesting to see. And that Ansible announcement was very... I saw that too, and I was like, "Oh, okay." So they're trying to like bake that into the product to a certain degree. So I'm curious to see where that goes. Cool. We have a question from one of our viewers, and they are asking. Oh no, that was. They've got 2. They've got 2 questions. Let's start with the import one because that's the one that we were just talking about. Where is that one? There we go. Okay. So he asked, does the new import feature do dependent connection of resources, or is that still manual? I happen to know the answer to that. So right now it does not create the dependencies between the resources. It just literally takes whatever values exist in the cloud. If you're doing the generate config, it just takes all those values and hard codes them into the configuration block. And then it's up to you to refactor that configuration block to use your input variables or references to other resources in the config. That's a tough nut to crack, to get all of those references in and figure out what things are connected and how, because the API it's working with on the cloud side doesn't necessarily tell you any of that. All right. And same person has another question. I tried to make ChatGPT generate Nomad job specs. It created non-existing configurations. It needs more training. Or ChatGPT. Yeah, that's been my experience with my few experiments with ChatGPT. Is the configurations look right, but then you actually try to run them. You realize pretty quickly, oh, it's like hallucinating resources that don't exist or arguments that don't exist. And so some people I was talking to recommended like sending it training configurations to get it to generate the configs you want. And I was kind of like, well, if I already have the configurations, why do I need ChatGPT?
Yeah, why do I need to train it?
Yeah, and I get where people are thinking about that, but how much training is it going to, like, how much data can you possibly provide for an already gigantic model? Like, you're going to move the needle. Like, is it going to move? I don't know.
Yeah, and you're training it for that one session, but that information doesn't really end up back in the larger model. So you're sort of priming it. Yeah.
So we've been told.
Okay, that kind of brings me to what I said earlier. Like I had kind of a hit and miss results with it as well, where, like I said, I think it works well where the model is quite well covered with, different use cases and different kind of things. But if you're trying to kind of get new knowledge out of it, it can be quite a hit or miss because it only operates with limited amount of data from your problem space, right? So
yeah, I think us as technologists, right, like we're generally working in much newer, versions of code, much newer versions of products than, that's been trained on, right? So I think that I feel like that's why we get limited, benefits, out of it, because we're generally looking for something that hasn't been blogged yet, hasn't been, put out
Right.
on a Medium post or something like that, right? So I feel like that's one reason, as technologists, like in our field, that's why we don't see as much benefit out of it yet. But
yeah,
I think there's that, but I do think, if you're not trying to get necessarily the full answer, but thinking about Terraform, like I can write Terraform all day, but I don't remember the exact syntax or attributes of every possible resource. But if I can say, hey, ChatGPT, give me the starting block for X, Y, and Z, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it gets you most of the way there, and then your linter or whatever will kind of catch some of the errors that ChatGPT is making. It was like last week, I got added into the beta for the Copilot chat feature. So I'm going to be taking that for a test drive soon. And I think that's kind of the best of both worlds. You've got all the stuff that Copilot already knows about Terraform, and it's usually pretty good with its suggestions. And now it's got a chat feature where I can ask it like to do a little bit more. So maybe next month I'll report back on how that's going.
That's through the plugin right through the IDE, right?
Yeah, so you don't even have to leave to go to a browser or anything.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the big defining for all of these things, is who wins kind of that space and makes that the best developer experience. Because if it's easy to consume, people will use it.
Yeah, precisely. All right. Sebi in the chat mentioned that the thing that he's excited about that was announced at Hashi Days was, is that the right one? Yeah, about Boundary SSH recording. So is anybody else excited about Boundary and SSH recording or caught what that is? Because I don't know if I caught that announcement.
Yeah, I mean, I've known, so I think way before Boundary was even a thing. This is probably 5 years ago. Like that was one of the ultimate features that they want to release. Like, and ultimately it was going to be Boundary, from my understanding, was going to be like an extension of Vault, right? So a lot of these features were going to be like inside of Vaults, especially like SSH recording, right? Because these are things that Vault competitors already have, and they've had for quite some time. So they, they obviously wanted to, come up to par with some of those competitors. So, So I've known about this for like years and years, but I had no idea like when it was going to happen. I just knew like it was kind of like, you know, a long running target that they wanted to add. So, I mean, I was excited to see it come out. I don't necessarily use it, right? Because we haven't, I think at work, we're going to start using Boundary for some things to connect to my local VMware lab that some of the folks use. But yeah, it's not something that I personally use, but I mean, I think it's cool to see it come out.
I think it's going to be a really cool feature from the, you know, kind of compliance perspective, I think, where a lot of folks are interested to kind of keep the audit trail as well as the recording of what actually changed in the SSH session. So I definitely see that as a really exciting feature and kind of brings Boundary par to par with kind of alternatives such as Teleport and stuff like that. So I think it's really cool, actually. I'm really excited about that. Even though, like Brian said, unfortunately, I don't use that because we're kind of operating in AWS space and there are kind of cloud native alternatives for that there. But I think it's a really cool feature in the HashiStack as such. So.
Agreed.
Cool. Yeah, I think I read something that, I mean, I guess it all sums up. SSH recording. It's just recording exactly what happened during the SSH session that's being proxied through Boundary. And I'm assuming they'll add support for other session types eventually as they go.
Yeah.
I mean, the demo was really cool at Hashi Days. Like, it was really nice to see, like, they were kind of doing the things, like malicious things on the instance. And you can actually go back at the recording and do, like, the play of the recording as well, like, retrospectively. That was kind of cool. So...
Now, the other thing I know about Boundary was the big announcement of Boundary Enterprise, which is sort of the on-premises or self-hosted version of what is currently Boundary HCP. So I kind of thought that already existed, but then going back through my notes, I'm like, no, it was just Boundary open source existed, but there was no like on-prem or self-hosted enterprise version of Boundary.
Yeah. Yeah. It's good to see. I mean, you know, you get customers that are in, you know, highly regulated environments that, you know, may not be able to consume HCP. So it's good to see that, you know, they can now deploy that in their own environment and take advantage of, you know, all the features of Boundary. So that's pretty cool.
Cool. Marco, I wanted to pick your brain a little bit about your Terraform cloud usage and what you're doing with Scale Factory, because I know you've built up sort of like managing Terraform cloud using Terraform. Can you walk us through a little bit about what you're doing there and how it's set up?
Yeah, sure. So as we're working with customers, you know, more and more customers were kind of starting to use Terraform Cloud. And, you know, one of the initial questions that we get with that is, you know, how do you manage that? Obviously, people don't want to kind of do the ClickOps there. So it's not like the kind of desired approach. And, you know, luckily, Terraform Cloud does offer the API access for that. And there is even a Terraform Cloud provider, Terraform provider for that. Which is actually quite cool. So we came up with a module, Terraform module, that manages Terraform Cloud workspaces for you. And I think one of the greatest features that I think of that modules are that you can actually set the values to authenticate, to target, let's say, AWS or any cloud environments from the centralized configuration workspace. And you can kind of inherit that down to all the workspaces that you're provisioning. So the complexity and overhead of managing those bits kind of lowers significantly. So it's literally a single place of management. There is obviously some initial manual steps that you have to take to set up that workspace. But as soon as you have that kind of sorted out and set up, everything can be managed from a central like VCS location, either that be GitHub or GitLab. And you have the same kind of approach and same workflow that you have for the rest of your infrastructure as a code. So you can manage your workspaces in the same way, which I think it's quite cool. And I'm really excited about that because it feels like it's kind of creating this overall same ISC experience that everybody's used to using, right?
So I'm curious what you see folks doing from a structural perspective. Are they, do they have like one dedicated workspace in their organization that manages everything else about Terraform Cloud, or do they create like a separate organization in Terraform Cloud to manage the other organization? Like, so what's the usual setup there?
So most of the times what we see is people would use the same organization. I do see maybe a use case where you would want to use a separate org for it, but most of the customers would just go with the same org and just separate the management workspace outside of the rest of the workspaces. And I know you talked a lot about that. So we have projects now in Terraform Cloud as well, so you can organize things slightly more neater, and kind of you can organize them in a more logical way now as well. And I think having the support for projects within the Terraform Cloud helps with that centralized organization as well. And it's usually just a centralized workspace. And the reason for not sprawling that out more, I think, is because the state and the resources that you manage, I think that's quite a limited amount of things that you need to hold in that state. So having it in a single state file kind of works well. But for example, if you were to kind of scale it up massively, maybe you can kind of sprawl it out in different workspaces and organize it based on the environments or like logical business units or something like that, right?
Right. You could have, business unit A has their workspace that manages all their other workspaces, something like that. Yeah. Interesting.
Exactly.
Cool. I like the idea of managing Terraform Cloud with Terraform. It's just something feels right about it, right?
Yeah. I mean, it kind of reminds me it kind of feels like I'm really old, but I'm not that old. But like, reminds me when SQL was kind of a big thing, like in the 90s, and there was this big thing when you kind of spun up your like MySQL instance, you can actually manage users using SQL language as well. And this kind of reminds me that you can manage your Terraform Cloud using Terraform, and it kind of gives me this special kind of warm feeling inside, like, oh yeah, you don't have to learn anything new, you already know it, it's there.
Right. What I discovered recently is you can create the connections to GitHub using the TFE provider without going through the whole dance between GitHub and Terraform Cloud. And that was like an aha moment. I'm like, oh, sweet. For my purposes of getting people set up demos and labs, it's like, okay, one less thing that they'll mess up copying and pasting fields. So yes. Cool. We do have a question, and this has to do with Waypoint and Nomad. So I don't know if anybody knows the answer to this, but the question is, can Argo CD behavior be mimicked using Waypoint for Nomad? Asking as I have not really used Waypoint besides watching the demo videos. So if anybody has some experience with Nomad and Waypoint, it's a good question.
I mean, like I said earlier, I used Waypoint, but it was mainly for AWS services, so I cannot really comment on the Nomad experience, to be fair.
So I did do a talk on it a couple of years ago, but it was pretty basic. It wasn't Nomad. I guess it depends on what functionality of Argo specifically. I mean, it's similar. You're going to have a repo that Waypoint's watching. It's going to watch for those changes to be committed and pull and redeploy. It does that nicely. I don't know about the Nomad part. I know that you can natively define Nomad as an endpoint for that deployment, but I've never tried it or used it.
Okay. So it sounds like something you could cobble something together that's a very similar experience to Argo. That's neat. Yeah, Waypoint is one of those products that I'm like, that's not for me. That's not targeted at the things that I tend to work on. We need to get like a Waypoint expert on here. Like last month we had a Nomad expert, and it was awesome because I got to throw all my Nomad questions at her. But we'll have to find someone who's really steeped in Waypoint maybe for next month. Mark, you had mentioned earlier that you're very interested in how Consul works with service meshes. Can you expand on that a little bit and how you're using Consul today in that regard?
Yeah, so it's my kind of part of my belief is that service mesh right now is maybe a little underrated. I think that maybe not a lot of organizations understand why service mesh. I just see as, we know that things are becoming more dynamic and ephemeral as we move to the cloud, as we move to Kubernetes. Service mesh gives us that really easy way to hook your workloads back into, the mothership of the network. And where the learning curve always comes from is you're talking with a network team, like, yeah, but what about my IP, whatever, and shifting people away from that IP-based access to an identity-based access. You can come up with some really cool workflows when you back that with something like Vault doing your identity brokering, saying, hey, yeah, this is the token, this guy gets access, or this guy gets access or workload. And then if you extend that even further with this ephemeral nature and cloud-based technologies, there's no walls around your data center anymore. So it becomes extremely complex, and the sprawl of managing that without something that can do that identity-based. I don't know how else you're going to do it at scale. If you're just going to keep deploying physical hardware or software-based firewalls, I think that's you're going to lose that battle, I think, today.
Okay. So I don't use Consul very often, so I don't know a lot about the how it uses identity to establish connectivity. What's the mechanism that it uses to associate identities with different things on the network?
So it's token based, ACL based out of the box. So if you're familiar with kind of the Vault, the way the Vault would have your policies, you have a token to get in, you have access to certain things. Very similar structure. If you're familiar with one, you'd probably pick up the other quite reasonably. So if you can map that identity back that has that token and says, hey, yeah, you can have access to this network. Here's the different services upstream or downstream that you should have access to, all controlled by your identity that says, yeah, this person can get this token. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and by identity, Ned, like when an application or pieces of an application, when they are provisioned, stood up on the network, they could grab a token from Vault. They could go use that token to go to Consul and say, hey, I'm a new web server, hosting this application, right? So there's their identity, right? Mm-hmm. And then they register themselves. So really the basis of everything Consul is around service discovery, right? Or a service catalog. So like when an application is provisioned, it registers itself in the service catalog as database XYZ, web application 123 or whatever. And then within Consul, you have what's called intentions for the service mesh aspect of it. And so from an administrative standpoint, you could go in there and say, okay, web 123 is allowed to talk to database XYZ, right? And so no matter how many web 123 instances come up or however many databases XYZ come up, like they will be able to communicate with each other without having to go to a network admin in the middle saying, hey, I need you to open up firewall for 10.6.18.20 because that just came online, right? Because of the intentions really focus on identities where web can talk to database. It doesn't matter, if these are containers that are spun up every hour and then get decommissioned, as long as they are properly registered themselves with the proper service, then they're allowed to communicate with the other services that they're intended to communicate with because the intentions will allow or deny that. Right. And so that all happens through like sidecars that get deployed most of the time Envoy that broker that conversation using, mutual TLS for encryption and authentication.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you don't have to use like the Consul agent on all your containers or something like that. It'll let you use Envoy for the connectivity or as the sidecar.
Well, those applications would still need to register with Consul somehow, right? So you don't necessarily have to use the agent because I think a lot of the, languages, have like SDKs and those kind of things where you have native integration with it. But that communication is still brokered through Envoy that runs as a sidecar alongside of that application. So the application doesn't necessarily know like where that application is. It just knows that, hey, if I need to talk to database 123, I'm going to go hit this, this port where the local sidecar is running. And then there's the configuration there permits that connectivity between, those two services based upon the intentions. And so basically the sidecars basically look at the intentions and say, is service 1 allowed to talk to service 2? If it is, cool, I'm going to, broker that communication. If not, I won't allow that communication.
Gotcha.
I think where it really comes into play, or at least I think when it really delivers value, is when you're spanning across different clusters, like even that be Nomad clusters or like Kubernetes clusters. When you go cross clusters and maybe even cross providers or regions, I think having a service mesh in play is probably a crucial thing, right? Like, I don't think there is an easier way to achieve that universal connectivity. And like Brian and Mark said, work based on the kind of aliases or identities rather than specific target ports or IPs. So,
yeah, that's really powerful, especially using things like prepared queries inside of Consul, right? So if you have multiple data centers that all have their own Consul data center in them, configured, right? So you have a set of servers in each distinct data center. And then you have services that are registered, the same services registered in 3 different data centers, right? So if you have a web trying to talk to database, but it's down locally, then the service mesh can actually broker that connectivity over to DC2, right? And so now it has connectivity into the database in another DC, all through the service mesh, and all done by identities and brokered by intentions. So that's really slick. So I did a talk at HashiConf, like, gosh, was that 3 years ago or 4 years ago, on prepared queries and how that helps with, failovers between data centers and, connecting services together and all that good stuff. So it's really cool to be able to use those. And of course, that's like, very simple, I say basic Consul usage. Like, there's a lot more complex stuff you can do, especially when you start integrating Consul with like Kubernetes and all that good stuff as well.
We can always make it more complex, can't we?
Yeah, always, especially when you add Kubernetes.
Oh, I just meant, like, our job as engineers is to take things that are relatively simple and make them hopelessly complex.
Right.
Keeps us employed.
Security.
Cool, man. I was looking at the other announcements at Hashi Days, and something that I actually participated in the private beta of was what's now called HCP Vault Secrets. So have any of you had a chance to play around with it?
I have not, unfortunately.
I have to admit, I did apply for the private beta as well, but I actually ran out of time before they announced it publicly. So I didn't have a chance to properly test it. But like with everything with HCP Vault, I feel like if they would hit the market earlier, I think that would be a really strong disruptor on the market. Because, I feel like Vault is one of those products that, I personally wouldn't want to run it on my own, but I would like to consume it as a service, right? Like, it's almost like Kubernetes. Like, I don't want to run my own Kubernetes cluster, but like, if you offer that to me as a service, that's definitely a feature I want.
Well, I think it's really interesting to make that comparison to Kubernetes. I almost think of it as like OpenStack and how that grew and changed and became a very specialized thing that only people who had like an army of engineers in their company were willing to like maintain and use. And Kubernetes could have been that same thing, but then we had a bunch of vendors kind of come together and go, all right, we are going to create distributions of Kubernetes that we manage, EKS, AKS, etc. And that will make it that much easier for people who are operating Kubernetes to not have to worry about the management layer as much. So I think that sort of helped lend the success, because it's the cloud model of deployment. It's prepackaged for you. It's managed. You just consume it as a service. And that makes it a lot easier. Vault,
exactly. And it should just maybe be available off the shelf, I think. Like, that's just a service that you want to have, like secrets managers. You probably don't want to manage that on your own unless you're HashiCorp or like a platform provider for somebody else. Kind of circling back, what I wanted to say about the new secrets feature they published, what I really found really cool thing about it is you can actually synchronize secrets from cloud provider managers now as well. So, for example, you can store your secrets in, let's say, AWS Secrets Manager, and that can actually be synchronized in Vault now. So you can actually consume Vault secrets that actually live somewhere else. I think that's a cool thing.
Yeah, Ned, if you remember last year at HashiConf, during all those briefings we had with PMs, like, that was one of the main requests, right? So I have applications running in AWS, I have applications running in Kubernetes, and they can only consume like the local secrets manager, right? And so, but we still want to centralize all our secrets inside of Vault. So how do we still do that, right? How do we make Vault kind of single source of truth, but still be able to replicate that data over to another secrets manager. So the application that's still bound by like an AWS secrets manager or something, it still has access to those secrets in secrets manager without, necessarily like, okay, now we're going to use this for this product. We're going to use this for this product, right? Some people are using Vault. Some people are using this. Like that, I really like that, because that allows, again, having Vault as a single source of truth and have that replicate one way to those other solutions. And then your applications can still consume, those other solutions if they need to, while you're still, kind of maybe backfilling applications to start consuming it directly from Vault instead.
Right. That was sort of the aha moment for me, because in the early private beta, there was no synchronization feature. So it was literally just like sort of secrets as a service without all the extra overhead of managing Vault. And I was like, this is okay, but like, why wouldn't I just use any of the cloud providers' versions of secret managers? And then they added the sync feature, and I was like, oh,
yeah,
okay. So now that can be my source of truth. And if I want to move my application or run it across multiple clouds or whatever it is, all of those can use the native secret solution in the cloud, in that particular cloud, but they're all going to have the same value that's being synchronized from HCP Vault's secrets. And as far as I know, like, I'm sure it's using Vault on the back end, but that's not exposed to you at all. It's a much more simplified interface in HCP for the Vault secrets versus full-blown Vault that has all the nodes and all the management that goes with that.
Yeah, to me, it feels like, an AWS secrets manager or something like that, right? It's just like super basic. Put your stuff in here, we'll secure it. That's it,
You took the words out of my mouth. I just wanted to say I quite like the slickness of it. So, you just kind of use and consume secrets without even knowing about the complexity behind it. And I think that's the magic, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I agree. You're abstracting all that away. And I don't know each of your own experiences, but there's always a bit of hesitation when you're working with a customer or they're implementing Vault. And then you go to that second or third team of developers. And it's like, whoa, we're way deep on AWS Secret Manager. Like, the end, we're not changing. This makes it really easy. They keep using what they're comfortable with, what they know, but they're still getting all the benefits of Vault upstream from that. So I think it's a great move.
Yeah.
I'm curious to see, and I have no insider information on this, so this is just me pontificating. I'm curious to see if this functionality of the secret sync makes its way back into full-blown HCP Vault and like Vault Enterprise.
Because that
ideally it will make its way back there for folks who are already running Vault and just want this sync thing to get added in. So it'd be nice.
I agree.
Since we're talking about Vault, one thing that I was very excited with the Vault 1.14 announcement was the addition of Acme for the PKI engine. It's like, yeah, that should have been there from a while ago.
One thing I am not excited about with Vault 1.14 as a content creator is the changing of the UI.
oh, geez. So I know I make training courses. I know Brian does. Mark and Marco, do either of you create like training courses or stuff like that has UI recorded versions of UIs?
Yes, I'm familiar with the problem space. Like, I don't create like public training like you and Brian, but like we do create training for our customers as well, and we run that as part of the retainer that we offer to customers. And I constantly face, like, even with AWS, constantly changing the UI definitely makes me busy all the time. So.
Yeah, we have something similar through a program we call Arctic Labs. We don't have it recorded. We don't have all these content on Udemy like Brian has to go update, but similar.
Yeah, it's so like, I get that they want to update the UI to be consistent across the products, and that's great and everything. But it's like, you changing it that drastically means that the course that I published like a month ago is now out of date. And it's not a simple change of, oh, I'll just update a couple scripts. It's like, no, I have whole sections that I recorded of that UI. And to re-record that is not as simple as just doing one thing, because they usually build on top of each other. So now I have to re-record a lot of things. And That's my
Exactly.
problem, I know, but it's
And
like,
kind of invalidate the whole training with a single stroke, right? Because
Right.
it's not just the UI change, but like there are different kind of functionalities and buttons added as well. So you cannot really relate to what you already have in the material. So
Yeah.
yeah, I have a Terraform cloud course and I need to go back and completely redo it. And it's less than 2 years old. But
Yeah.
Terraform Cloud has just been changing at such a rapid clip that at least the core concepts are still the same. Like I can at least rely on that. Everything that doesn't show the UI, the concepts haven't really changed. It's just like new features and a slightly different look. That's why I should do everything from the CLI,
There you
because that
go.
doesn't change.
There you go. Yeah. Another thing that we caught some of the engineers on our side, I sent a message out that 1.14 actually adds a little bit of kind of call home features for vaults when you're talking about licensing, right? So it sends minimal product license metering data back to HashiCorp without requiring you to manually collect and report them, right? So before, to my knowledge, none of the licenses necessarily like called home and said, hey, I'm consuming X amount of, workspaces or resources or whatever. So I thought that was interesting. You can opt out of that, like in your config file. And actually just yesterday, the day before, I pushed up to my GitHub, like that change, like to add it on there to say like false, like don't upload that. Obviously that may be beneficial for a lot of folks. Like they don't understand like their consumption model or how many licenses, how many clients, how many, resources that they're using. Like I'm sure that's very beneficial to working with, the renewals team and those kind of things. But I thought that was interesting that they also added that as well.
Yeah. Any other announcements anybody wants to bring up from the Hashi days? I think we covered most of the big ones, or at least the ones that caught my eye.
So I was quite excited about the Explorer feature in Terraform Cloud. It's still a beta thing, but I quite like the kind of a high-level single pane of glass view that you can have now over your workspaces. So it kind of shows you all the versions of modules, Terraform, and different kind of dependencies that you're using across your organization. So I'm quite excited about that one. I hope they're going to make like the API access or maybe some metrics available out there as well. So you can kind of hook it up to maybe custom graphs or Grafana or something like that. Maybe scrape it with, I don't know, Prometheus, for example. And the second thing that caught my eye, it's kind of coming up soon. It was just an announcement. It's not part of the Terraform Cloud yet. But during the Hashi days, Armin announced they are currently working on so-called ephemeral workspaces. So you can you will be able to set the TTL on a workspace that will self-destroy after a certain part of time. So specifically, if you're working on a new feature, kind of testing something out, or maybe you're working on a training, right? And you want to automatically destroy that and don't leave the infrastructure up and running and forget about it. I think that's quite a cool feature that hopefully is going to be available for testing soon.
There's actually a feature that I know some of the other competing platforms have had for a while, is the idea of being able to set a TTL for a workspace and or project or whatever they called it on their platform. We'll use workspace since we're talking about Terraform Cloud, but being able to just set a TTL of 24 hours to have it automatically self-destruct. That seems really useful, but also potentially very dangerous.
Someone accidentally sets it.
Yeah. So you definitely want that to be super intentional.
Yeah.
It's been interesting to watch Terraform Cloud add features that other platforms already have and how they approach implementing the same thing. I think we're rapidly reaching feature parity across a lot of them. For me, the one big gap that a lot of them have is sort of to go back to the import thing that we started with way back at the beginning. It's the discovery of existing infrastructure and adding and bringing it under management. So there's more tooling now around Terraform being able to do that from an import block basis, but just being able to go, hey, here's an AWS account. Go tell me everything that's in that AWS account and let me select what I want to import and start managing with Terraform. If they could figure that one out, I feel like that would be a huge feature that people would be very excited for.
Yeah, that would be for sure like a killer feature, whoever comes up with that first. And kind of coming back to what you said, I think I agree with you. There is kind of a lot of competitive products out there in that space, but I feel like that's kind of driving the innovation even further. Like, maybe even forcing HashiCorp to kind of adopt similar approaches or maybe innovate a little bit more. So I wouldn't necessarily say that's a bad thing on the market. So.
Yeah, I definitely was not trying to present that as a bad thing.
Yeah.
I think it's great that there's competition in the marketplace because it forces all of them to make their services better, and compete on price a little bit.
Yeah,
It doesn't hurt either.
Speaking of price,
yeah.
Since the last time we talked, I think Terraform Cloud changed their pricing model. Right, so
a lot.
Yeah, a lot. Yeah. Any thoughts on that?
Well, so from my perspective, I'm very excited that they've expanded what's available in the free tier so much.
That was huge. Yeah.
So like the things that I wanted to try out, every time I wanted to try them out, I'd have to create a new organization and sign up for the free 30-day trial at the teams and governance level so that I could just try out a new feature. Like, when they added the OPA run tasks or something like that, I don't even know if that was available on the teams and governance, but like I always had to create a new organization and build temporary stuff. And now it's just on the free tier, I have access to one run task, and I also have access to a hosted cloud agent, so I can mess around with that cloud agent too, because that was something that was just business tier before. They did something with SSO too, right?
Yeah, SSO is now free as well.
It is part of the free tier now, yeah. So
Oh,
I think they pushed almost all the enterprise features all the way down to free tier. But yeah,
with a cap, it was like a usage cap, right?
Yeah,
so it's a resource count now. So they would kind of include 500 resources in the free tier, and everything above that, it's kind of a payable tier now. So you pay per resource per hour. So the model is quite similar to what you would see in cloud providers, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in terms of what a resource is, it's literally a managed resource in the state data. So as long as it's a resource that's flagged as managed, then it would be included. But resources like the null resource and the Terraform data resource don't count because they're not real objects. They're just, made up objects so you can kick off lifecycle stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, Dustin actually just asked the question, which
great timing.
Magically answered. Any actual resource counts towards that 500 total, and it doesn't. It's across all your workspaces. So the two that I mentioned, the null resource and the Terraform data resource, those don't count because they're not actual resources.
Yeah.
I don't know about stuff like local file. You would think local file would not count, but maybe it does.
I think it counts because it's a resource. It has a limited usage in Terraform Cloud though, but at the same time, if you have it in the state, I take into account. I just wish they would bring the kind of the GUI up to date with the change as well. So if you look at the GUI, it shows you all the resources in the state, including data and I believe null resources. So that's something that they would improve on.
Yeah, data sources are also not counted. So you can have, if you're referencing availability zones or something, you're not getting dinged for that resource because Terraform's not managing it. It's just more information that it's pulling in.
Data, yeah.
I mean, the other thing that I noticed is the next tier after free is standard. And if you sign up for standard, as long as you stay below 500 resources, it's still free.
It's true.
And then you do get access to a couple things, I think more run tasks and something else that's in the standard tier that you wouldn't get if you were just staying on the free tier. So if you can make yourself stay under that 500 resource limit, and maybe if the reporting improves, it'll be easier to tell.
Exactly. And I think the responsibility falls on you in terms of you still have to give them credit card data in order to get on the standard tier. And it's up to you to keep it below 500. Otherwise, they're just going to charge you for it, right?
Yes, that's the thing. Like I would want some sort of alert to get fired. When
billing alerts. That's what I was thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I had billing alerts across all my AWS accounts. Hey, you've gone over $10. You've gone over $15, right? We need something like that.
Maybe an idea for a future feature, right? Like a budget for a Terraform cloud.
I'm sure
It's
they're
part of
thinking about it.
Terraform.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just, as part of that Explorer feature, Marco, you were saying including like dashboards in the API and the ability to scrape like telemetry information. I would love to be able to scrape how many resources I'm using across all my workspaces and then feed that into a Lambda function or something, or even a Zap on Zapier to just send me an alert when I get to 450.
Yeah, you can do that. Just an API call to TFC probably to grab your current, estimated bill costs.
Yeah, exactly. And feels like now when you have all those features available in that, their organization count is going to go drastically down, right? Because you're not going to be opening all the organizations.
Yeah.
At least from me, yeah. Well, I'm not going to be creating an organization every other day. We did have another question from Dustin who asked about what resources count. How much does the first one that you're paying for actually cost? And that is a good question. And let me pull up the billing while I'm. So data sources. Definitely.
This is what I kind of like about the new model is the old model was kind of a cliff edge kind of thing. So you were on the free tier up to 5 users, but if you started with the teams and governance, you were immediately charged for all the people. Whereas now it's just a gradual transition for like 500 is free, and then you just charge the same for any kind of resources above it, right?
Right. So I looked it up, and based off of like standard plans, so this is just what you can sign up for in the portal. The cost per resource is 9.7 cents per resource per month, and that's billed on an hourly basis, I think. So if you have that 501st resource for, say, a whole month, that would cost you about 10 cents. So it's not like 501 you're getting charged $100 or something like that. It's pretty reasonable. And Sebi just asked to reiterate, does the free tier come with agents now? And yes, it does. So if you want to spin up your own self-hosted agent, you're limited to 1 on the standard and the free tier. If you go up to the, what are they calling it now? The plus tier, which you actually have to reach out to a salesperson for. Boo. I don't like that part. That you can get up to 10, and that limit can be pushed up above 10. But I think, if you just want to try it out, 1 should be more than sufficient.
And what I like about it as well is you're not anymore limited to number of users that you can have. I think that's quite a big thing as well, I guess.
Yeah, I'm gonna go set up SSO when we're done with this live stream, because I've been meaning to just try it out and see how it works. So now that I know I can do it, I actually signed up my org for the standard plan because I've got 72 resources, so I'm well below the limitations.
Nice. Yeah, we just set up SSO internally. We never really had it set up, so we just set it up SSO up with everything. So it wasn't too bad.
Cool.
I'll actually be curious to hear the experience and maybe even watch your stream, Nat, because I always wanted to try that out as well.
Okay, well, it looks like I've committed to 2 experiments over the next month. I got to set up SSO on Terraform Cloud, and I got to take Copilot Chat for a test drive and see how helpful it is. So I will report back next month. All right, gents, we are getting close to the top of the hour, so I want to give everyone a chance to talk about where they can be found, any cool projects they're working on, those kinds of things. So Marco, why don't you go first? Tell the people who are watching, where can they find you if you're a social person, if they're looking for services, where could they sign up for that?
So probably the best place to kind of find me currently is either Twitter. I would be @_MarcoB, or LinkedIn. If you just type my name, I'm sure it's probably the first kind of hit you're going to get. Okay. I'm also experimenting with Blue Sky, if anybody's there. But that's probably... Oh, yep, nice, Brian.
I'm there too.
But those are kind of the main points of contact, I guess. And probably the most interesting project that I'm currently working on is probably that Terraform module that I mentioned for the Terraform enterprise provider. That's kind of a cool thing. That's me, I guess. If you're interested in, consultancy services on AWS, feel free to reach out to Scale Factory.
Awesome. Thanks, Marco. And Mark, what about you?
Yeah, I've been here before, so I didn't do the Twitter thing like you and Brian, but I am on Twitter a little bit. You find me more active on LinkedIn. Probably the easiest way to find where we were tagged on this stream. You can find me. Interesting projects. I'm just following what everyone's talking about with Gen AI right now. I think it's really interesting how it's evolving so quick. I think there's a lot of complexity. That's mostly just a side obsession because I think that it's not going away. I think it's a thing we need to be informed about.
Right.
Where to find me for services? Definitely jump by Arctic's website, arctic.ca, and it's Arctic with a Q, not a C. You can get a hold of us there.
Cool. Brian, what about you?
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Ned. Interesting project. Just got added to a very large vault project with a very large bank in the US. So helping do a lot of remediation and next gen kind of stuff with them. So super excited with that. Content wise, I've got a lot of, like always, I've got 80 irons in the fire right now, way too many. I was actually up past midnight last night recording things. So got up a little bit tired this morning, but actually creating content that is not HashiCorp related, believe it or not, for the first time ever. I know. So yeah, all in content, btk.me/btk. That's my URL shortener. Just go straight to my GitHub that has links to everything. And yeah, of course, I'm on Twitter, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, all those good things as well. So I was happy to connect.
Cool. And in case anybody's curious, you can find me on LinkedIn and Twitter. I think everybody else, I'm more focused on LinkedIn these days because Twitter's a bit of a dumpster fire. Yeah. So I tend to stay away from it. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me. I'm currently working on a total revamp of my Terraform deep dive course for Pluralsight, and that it will include the new import block, which I'm glad came out right before I started the course, not right after I started redoing it. Cool. Well, thank you all of you for joining me today and sharing your thoughts and ideas about what's going on with HashiCorp. Hopefully all of you will be willing to join at some point again in the future. And thanks to everybody for tuning into the live stream and for sending in your questions. We'll be back next month with another HashiStack conversation. Until then, stay healthy, stay safe out there, and we'll see everybody on the interwebs.
Thank you.